Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at how we can easily and simply hook into the performance counting system that's built into the Windows operating system and pull data out of it within our .NET application. In a prior episode we took a look at how you could push data into the performance counting mechanism. This time we're going to turn on and take it right back out. So I already have perfmon up and running. My VM here is Windows Server 2008. So perfmon might look a little different on your machine. To get it, you just need to go to the run command and type in perfmon, P-E-R-F-M-O-N, and it'll pop up. The first thing we're going to do today is we're going to want to find a counter that we'll want to add and hook into via code. The simplest one, the one that'll actually show us things happening, is the processor counter. And if I collapse this real quick, all of these high-level names are called categories. So we're going to choose the processor category. And then we're going to come down here and we'll just do percent processor time. We could really choose any of these. I'll just choose percent processor time. This is called the counter name. And then down here we have the various instances of the counter. We'll go ahead and choose total. And I'll click add. When I click OK here, you'll see here that in a few seconds perfmon starts recording this information. And what we want to do is basically output the same style information, but within our .NET application. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we're going to need to do is create a class. I'm going to call this performance counter reader. I need to learn how to spell here real quick. Make this a public class. And we essentially just need one public method. We'll call this setup counter. And setup counter has a few requirements. So category name, counter name, and instance name. And essentially what we're going to do here is we're just going to create an instance of our counter and hook it up and listen for it. Now in our example here we're just going to basically do an infinite loop. In a real example you'd probably want to use some kind of timer mechanism. So before we do anything, what I actually want to do is ensure that the counter and the category I provide are valid. Otherwise, we'll get some weird exceptions. So performance counter category is part of the system.diagnostics namespace, and it is what gives us access to the counter mechanism. And we can ask if it exists. So we'll say, does category name exist? If not, return. Then we're going to do the same thing to see if the counter name exists. So we can do counter name. And if that doesn't exist, we'll go ahead and return as well. This will just save us some blow-ups later. Now that we're relatively assured that both the counter and the category exist, we actually can create our instance of our performance counter. And when you create an instance of the performance counter, you can see there's multiple overloads. I'm going to go ahead and give it the one that's the category name, counter name, and the instance name. I now have my instance of the performance counter. Now what we're going to want to do here is just do while true. And we're essentially just going to use the performance counter, and there's a property on it called next value. Next value will give you the value that's obtained from the sample. And because we do have an infinite loop and I want to slow down the pace of feedback, I'm going to give it a 500 millisecond wait time. Now, right now it won't do anything, and I could simply just debug that out, put this to the screen here, but we don't want to do that. We actually want our reader to report it back via an event. So let's come up here and create an instance of an event. We'll create a void delegate. We'll call this performance value handler. And this will just take in a float as its value. And of course we got the delegate now, so we actually need to create the event. Now we have both our delegate and our event created, I like to create a little wrapper around my event. The reason I create this little wrapper is because you need to do an if check to ask if the performance value handler is null. Because if it is null, you don't want to use it because you'll get a null reference exception. And now we're just going to say performance we now have the code needed to read our counter and raise it via an event. So let's go ahead and create a unit test here and see how this would work. Now the first thing I want to do is create an instance of my performance counter reader. And I'm going to say setup counter. Now, if we bounce back to this, so the counter I want is the processor counter. The categories processor. The counter I want is percent processor time. That's the exact name of it. And the instance is underscore total. So I've now set up my counter. Now, we do want to listen for the event, so let's go ahead and wire up our event for that. And we're going to take advantage of Lambda syntax here. Let's do this, and we're just going to do debug.writeLine. String.format, we'll just say value. What did I wire up incorrectly here? Performance counter reader, performance value, next val. I have my, plus equals was backwards. And I've now wired up my event. So if I run this, let's see what happens. You can see that my value is being outputted to my output window, and the value is changing. In fact, if I bounce over to perfmon, you'll see the values are changing pretty much in sync with the perfmon screen. So as you can see, within 7 or 8 minutes, and if less than a dozen lines of code, you can actually hook into the underlying performance counting mechanism built in the operating system, report this data out through into your application. So I hope you learned something. Until next time.